He was the greatest naval commander in the history of Britain. By the time he reached the most important battle of his career, he had a string of victories that can only be called astounding, and he had paid for it. Injuries had put him at one point on desk duty, and he never fully regained sight in one of his eyes. Later, after returning to duty, he lost an arm in battle, only to return to the sea again. And now, as commander of the British fleet, he was facing the combined navies of France and Spain. It would be his greatest victory, and the beginning of the end for Napoleon. For as the fighting would continue on land for a number of years, on this day, France lost the ability to significantly influence the war on the sea. The Battle of Trafalgar, the Admiral, Horatio Nelson. But this greatest victory would also be his last. As in the waning seconds of the battle, with victory assured, he was struck by a sniper's bullet and died. Thus ensued a state funeral like no other, especially like no other for one who was not royalty. And it came to be that Nelson was laid to rest in a marble casket that Henry VIII had once planned to use himself in the most revered space, directly under the altar of St. Paul's Cathedral, the church known as the Church of the Nation. Nelson had become the highest order of British man. His popularity was unmatched. George, Washington, Elvis, all rolled into one. Certainly worthy of praise, to be admired, even lifted up as an example of faith, for his faith was strong. But the whole thing's a bit troubling, too. The lifting of the military leader in battle, where many, many died. The many whose lives were worth just as much. Like the powder monkeys. They weren't monkeys, they were little boys, sometimes women. And they ran between the hull of the ship and the cannons, keeping the cannons supplied with gunpowder. Boys whose life expectancy in battle might be measured, according to some, in minutes. Their job was that dangerous. Nelson was definitely called to his task, but so were those boys, as were those manning the cannons, steering the ships, tending the sails. But for many, perhaps a plaque stuck in a corner, or a general sculpture somewhere. But precious little until recently, when these inequities began to be addressed and the tale told of the sacrifice, the equal sacrifice they made for country and king. Where am I going? Well, Samuel was also called by God. And sometimes we think, okay, cool, he's going to be like a pastor or someone like Michelle or a church leader asked to put the needs of others before their own. But according to studies, those of us who are lay people who don't work for church don't think we're called like that. Like Samuel, not in the same way. Not in the same way as those who come here to work every day. But you are. God has called each and every one of us. God is here to give each and every one of us the strength and the fire to do the work of God. God is tugging at us. God is pointing a way for us, pleading with us to bring light to this world. The call is here. The call is real. The call is yours. But in all the noise we hear, in a world where the popular understanding of faith says, believe in God and God will make you rich, or believe in God and God will get you to the good place, and those others, well, maybe not so much. Or that certain Christians have the right to force others to live a certain way. In that world, I think we should be reminded of what we are called to and what we signed up for. We follow a Savior who was poor, who stayed that way. A Savior who was shown the kingdoms of the world by the devil and offered them, and who refused. A Savior born poor and who always identified with them. A Savior who never sought to use his abilities to acquire riches. We follow a Savior who had to leave his own land and live in a foreign land as a baby, carried by his parents to flee a king seeking his life. A Savior whose story mirrors the story of his own people, who are constantly reminded in the Old Testament, be good to the alien, for you were once an alien in the land of Egypt. We follow a Savior who reached across lines of class, country, tribe. Who understood that all people were God's children and called to God's reign of love, who ministered and healed Greek and Samaritan and Roman without regard for the color of skin. A Savior who even brought healing to those who didn't ask for it or profess the same faith. A Savior whose actions echoed the prophets of old, proclaiming God's family was not bound by human construct, and God's family was not just one color, God's family was not just one people. We follow a Savior who made it clear an earthly kingdom was not his to claim, and not for his people, Israel, to claim. A Savior who chose to disappoint those, including the disciples, who thought his rule could be an earthly one. A Savior who believed in a kingdom beyond politics and beyond political boundaries. A Savior who not only healed without cost, but who fed the hungry spiritually and physically, never asking if that gift was deserved. A Savior who lifted up women, even as the church that called his name went a little crazy after the resurrection, trying to keep women in their place, managing the popularity of that first apostle, Mary Magdalene, and other women, casting aspersions on them, reminding women in general of their place in society, perpetuating the sins of male dominance. A Savior who never chose the sword, even when his earthly life was at stake. That's the one calling. That's who we've signed up with. And it's a call we struggle to embrace. We need the armed services. We rightly honor our heroes. We need first responders. We rightly honor them. And the politics and situations revolving around immigration and health care and on and on and on might be very complicated. But this is Jesus. Plain and simple. And that's his calling. Not those, sometimes including ourselves, who created Jesus that fits their needs and change his call to match what they want. Not those who put words in his mouth. Why start with Admiral Nelson? Well, Nelson was a great man, But we tend to create our own mythology around people, especially when it's useful to our cause. And Britain did that just like we do with our heroes. Until that image that we create of our heroes serves what we want, often too conveniently, an image that serves to keep things the way that we, as human beings, want them. It happens with Jesus all the time. And when we let that happen, we are not heeding the call. Samuel was called in a time when the message of God had become lost, changed. Samuel was called to set it right, and he was promised God would be with him. We need to set it right. All of us. God's call comes through God's Son, and that call is for you. It's a challenging call that asks us to put God's will above our own and to fight for God's vision of this world. It's a call telling us how to live, a vision that shows us a way ahead, a vision that might not be popular, but the vision that brings peace, restoration, and upholds the dignity of every human being. And God will be with us in this work.